Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for Osteoporosis Canada's cooking demo webinar in partnership with Danone Canada and Oikos Greek Yogurt. Before we begin today's webinar, Osteoporosis Canada acknowledges the land that our offices, located in Toronto, are on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. My name is Tracie Napoli, Director of Fund Development and MARCOM at Osteoporosis Canada, and I will be your cooking demo host today. Welcome to you and everyone who registered, watching on Zoom, or those watching the live stream on Osteoporosis Canada's Facebook page. This webinar will provide general information about cooking and food knowledge. It is not intended as individualized health or nutrition advice. If you have questions about nutrition, consult a physician or registered dietitian. Now, if you have questions during the webinar and you're watching on Zoom, you can easily enter them by clicking the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Or if you're watching via Facebook Live, you can also enter your question in the comments section, and we will do our best to answer as many questions as we can during the webinar within the time available. Over the last year, we have all been planning and preparing more meals at home, and we are looking for more ways to keep getting the bone-building nutrients we need daily. Nutrition is a key component for strong and healthy bones, and Osteoporosis Canada is working to provide strategies, new ideas, and recipes needed to keep bones strong and healthy. Calcium, vitamin D, and protein are essential nutrients for proper bone health. Calcium is one of the key minerals that makes bone hard. Vitamin D ensures our bodies can absorb enough calcium, and protein is also necessary to build and repair bone tissue. Do you know how much calcium and vitamin D you need daily? Check out the chart that's available on our Osteoporosis Canada website, and you can see how much you need daily based on your age. Now, when trying to calculate the calcium you're getting from food sources, you always should read the product label. For products like yogurt, the calcium listed will differ based on the serving size and the type of yogurt. For example, we are using Oikos Greek Yogurt in today's recipe, and the amount of calcium listed, which is 175 milligrams, is based on a serving of 3/4 of a cup. So let's get cooking today. Now, today's featured recipe is Garlic Rapini Pizza Bianca with 500 milligrams of calcium and 26 grams of protein per serving. You can find today's recipe on the Osteoporosis Canada website at osteoporosis.ca/recipes. I will also post the link to the recipe in the chat on Zoom, and we'll post it in the comments section on Facebook Live. Now, did you know one of the ingredients in today's recipe, which is rapini or broccoli rabe, has 118 milligrams of calcium per 100 grams serving? It is now my pleasure to welcome Emily Richards, who is a professional home economist, freelance food writer, chef, and is the author and co-author of 9 cookbooks. Emily also writes and develops recipes for print and online publications that include everyday cooking and healthy eating, and she can be found on TV, radio, and webcasts just like this one. Welcome, Emily.
Thanks, Tracie. Always have to get that unmute button. Thanks for joining me, everybody. And I am so excited about this recipe. It's got so many of my favorite ingredients. I can't even begin to tell you. Well, I guess I can begin to tell you, and I can begin to cook. If you've already taken a look at the recipe, you may have noticed that it has a long ingredient list, but let's take it apart and make it together, because that's really the bonus of having these types of cooking webinars, is because you can ask questions. So I encourage any questions as I'm going along. Please ask away, and Tracie will let me know. And also, we're going to take this recipe apart because the components of it, there's basically 3 different components to the recipe, can be used in many different ways. So this recipe I think of as a multi-purpose recipe that you will want to keep in your recipe toolkit at home. So lots of great flavors going on and a great use of the Oikos Greek Yogurt. I always have it in my fridge because I use it in baking and cooking. I like to just enjoy it on its own. So it really has lots of versatility here, as you'll see in the recipe. So the first thing we're going to start off with is my top favorite ingredient. That's green, and that's the rapini. This is what a bunch of rapini looks like. So it also is known as broccoli rabe. So it has a little bit of, it's recognizably a bitter flavor to a lot of people. So the first thing that we're going to do is actually blanch it to help remove some of that bitterness. So if you've never had rapini before, I highly recommend this step because it does kind of just make it a really approachable green. Now you buy it in a bunch. It usually weighs about 1 pound. We're going to use the whole bunch in the recipe, and I'm just going to gather it all up here. What I want you to look for is take a look at all the greens on top. You might spot a few little yellow bits. That's okay. That just has a stronger flavor. If it's a lot of yellow, you want to make sure you go through and pick those leaves because they will have a little bit more bitterness to them. They taste great. You can cook them. But if this is your first time out, you'll want to remove those. Now, if I flip it over, I'll show you the ends here. Okay, they're split a little bit. We're just going to trim them so that we have a nice kind of clean beginning. You don't have to, but I just really like to trim those off. And it's also, they are a little bit tougher. So I'm going to just set those aside. And I've already got my pot of water boiling. So we're blanching them. Blanching them simply means that we're going to be putting it into a pot of water for about 5 or 6 minutes. And you can do this with any green vegetable. It brightens the color, softens the stem. So this is the stem that we're going to be softening a little bit. And it also, here's a great benefit. When this is on sale, you can buy multiple bunches, blanch it, chill it, and then pop it in the freezer. So you can make this pizza anytime. So I have my pot of water in the back that I'm just going to slip this into. So just like that, the whole bunch goes in. It's a nice big pot. There's absolutely no salt in here. I just want to kind of push it down, and then I'm going to forget about it for a few minutes, okay? So while that's happening, I have my colander ready because we are going to be draining it and rinsing it with some cold water. That's just going to shock it so we get that really nice green color that stands out in this pizza. So that's kind of step 1. So the garlic rapini is one part. We're going to hop over to the bechamel sauce. So this is a mother sauce that is made with milk, creamy, delicious. You may have used it in lasagna. You may have used it as the base for macaroni and cheese. Here, it is the base sauce for our pizza, okay? So it might be a little bit of a different approach. If you're used to having that traditional, pizza sauce style pizza, this definitely gives you a lot of creaminess. So we are gonna start off with making sure that my burner turns on. There we are. We're gonna start off with a little bit of butter. So we are going to make a roux. That's the first part of our bechamel sauce. So what that means is that we're using equal amounts of fat and flour, and that's going to help create that thickness and the start of the creaminess of this sauce. So I'm using all-purpose flour, and this is a recipe that typically works best with all-purpose flour just because of the strength of the flour in it. If you wanted to, you could use a whole wheat flour here, and that works well as well, okay? If we're talking gluten-free flours here, doesn't have the strength as the all-purpose flour, so you won't get quite as thick of a bechamel, okay? So I'm melting away, and melted butter always smells wonderful. If you want to add a little bit more flavor here, you can actually brown the butter a little bit once it starts to pick up a little bit of a brown color. I'm going to move this over so that you can see what's happening in my pot as the butter melts. So once the butter's melted, I have my whisk ready to go. I'm going to add all 3 tablespoons of the flour. You want to do this over about a medium heat. And what we want to do is cook the flour a little bit. So that will remove kind of that raw starchiness of the flour. And not a time to walk away here. I do want to point out also that I have all my ingredients out at room temperature. This really does benefit the whole recipe because it comes together so quickly and easily. So I've let that cook for about a minute, and I'm going to slowly add my milk. I'm using 2% milk today. And I want to continue to whisk while I'm doing this so that I get a nice smooth sauce. You might have to be a little bit more vigorous with your whisking. So if any of you are working on your biceps, I highly recommend whisking. It's always a great way to do some exercise in the kitchen. And this is where we have to have a little bit of patience. So I want to make sure I whisk around so that I don't end up with any lumps in the flour. And I'm still cooking over about a medium heat. And what I'm looking for is the sauce to thicken and start to bubble. I'm also going to add a pinch of salt here as well, okay? Just to start building our flavor. And you'll notice that all three components of the recipe have levels of seasoning, okay? So here we're starting off with just a little pinch of salt. So I'm whisking all around, making sure I get into the crevices of the saucepan. So crevices where the bottom meets the side, where flour likes to live when you're making a bechamel. And that's just to make sure that it gets nice and smooth. So this is the base of a wonderful sauce. As I said, if you were making mac and cheese, you could, once this is thickened, you could add some shredded cheese in here, which would be fabulous. You could also use some garlic in here if you wanted to up the ante. We're using lots of garlic in the rapini, so trust me on this one when I say, if you love garlic, you'll want to add garlic to this as well. Whether it's fresh garlic or garlic powder, you could use either here. It would work really nicely. So you can start to see I have some bubbles. I'll stop whisking so you can see a little bit more. The bubbles are starting around the edge. I can actually feel the texture thickening of the sauce, okay? And I want to show you with my whisk here when I lift it. I'm also trying to control my heat. But as you lift the whisk, it kind of leaves some ribbons in there. So that is a great sign to know that it is thick. So as I said, it doesn't take long. It's not, whoop-a-daisy. It's not a lot of, my other camera fell. There we go. We'll try to fix that so that it catches everything. There we are. So it's not a lot of milk, so it doesn't make a large quantity. That's why it comes together nice and quickly. So once you start to see the bubbles and it thickens, I want you to take it off the heat. And then you're going to add some flavorings. We are going to add, and if you forget to add the pinch of salt earlier, you can add it now, but we're going to add some grated Parmesan cheese. Now, if you have pre-grated cheese, definitely you could use that here. I'm using fresh grated Parmesan cheese because I love that way it melts and it adds that nice little bit of flavor to it. We're using about 1/3 cup there, and you can see it quickly melts right into that. And here is where we're adding our first bit of plain Greek yogurt. I'm using the 2% yogurt, and when I'm cooking, I do want to have that little bit of fat in the yogurt because it really does help keep that creaminess. We're building on the creaminess of this milk sauce, and we're intensifying it, but we're also adding flavor. Oftentimes we think of plain yogurt as not having flavor, but in this case, it adds a really nice tanginess to the sauce as we build more level of flavors. Here is our 1/2 cup of the 2% Greek yogurt. I'm just gonna grab a spatula, and we're gonna add this right at the end, okay? So if you have everything at room temperature, the tendency is that you will not forget any of your ingredients, but I will count on Tracie to help me out should I forget any of my ingredients. Right, Tracie?
You bet, Emily. Don't worry, I'm here to help support. That looks so great.
And as soon as you add that yogurt, it becomes even thicker, okay? So I'm gonna set this aside and hop back to my rapini. Don't think I didn't forget, it's there, I know it is. And it is ready to come out. So I have my strainer just on a plate here. I'm taking out the whole bunch. Okay, and I'm going straight to the sink. So what I want to do here is just run some cold water on it so that it chills the rapini as well as help to keep that nice bright green color. Okay, so if I was planning ahead and knowing that, you know, when we can all gather together and I'm going to have my family over, I'm going to make multiples of these pizza biancas, I'm going to need to have rapini in the freezer. So what I would do is, after chilling it with cold water, I'm going to let it cool completely. Okay, and you can just set it aside. And then once it's cool, you can actually just give it a little squeeze, put it in a Ziploc bag, and then tuck it away in the freezer. So you have it for anytime you need it. And you can actually cook it from frozen. So it's a nice, easy way to know that you're prepared. Now, I've already gone ahead and had some ready for me, and I did coarsely chop it because that's what we want in the recipe. I do have the recipe nearby just in case. So you can see how beautiful. It's a nice deep green color now. And I've just chopped it coarsely. So what does that mean? Anywhere from, 1.5 inch to 2-inch pieces. I did attempt leaving the rapini whole on the pizza. It became a little tricky to cut. So that's why I went with the coarsely chopped, because it really does create a beautiful look to the pizza. And when you bite into it, you don't have to pull really, really far to kind of break off the rapini, which is really nice. All right, so now we're going to make the garlic rapini. This is something that I grew up eating. My background is Southern Italian, and believe it or not, I would prefer rapini over asparagus as a child. I know, crazy, right? I love both now, but green vegetables are something that are a staple I grew up eating because they were in the garden. I'm looking for my oil. Where did I put it? I put it somewhere where I wouldn't spill it. There it is. Far away from me. I'm sure that happens to you in the kitchen. We're starting off with 3 tablespoons of, I'm using extra virgin olive oil because I really like that flavor. You could use whatever oil you have on hand. You could even use butter here if you wanted to, but I really wanted that little bit of olive oil flavor to come through. And of course, our garlic. We are adding 3, the largest cloves you have. If you love garlic, that's what you're going to add into the oil here. Okay, make sure I get all of it in. And then I'm going to add my blanched rapini that I've chopped. I haven't turned on the heat yet. I will turn on the heat, I promise. I just want to make sure that I have everything in there and out of the way first. Okay. And I'm going to turn that on. And I'm going to add a little bit of heat to this. I'm going to add some hot pepper flakes. So a little sprinkle, about a 1/4 teaspoon. If you, again, want to balance off that heat with the garlic, by all means, increase that, double it, 1/2 teaspoon. I always like to have my jar of hot pepper flakes handy so that as I'm serving it, you could always just do a little sprinkle on each piece as you're serving it. And then here's our seasoning. Just, we're going to use a little bit of salt in the rapini as well. Okay. So the rapini is cooked. We're not cooking it here. What we're doing is actually softening the garlic and marrying the 2 flavors, the flavor of the garlic and the rapini together. Okay. And basically, once you start to smell that garlic, you're good. Okay. So if I was making this for anything other than this pizza, I'll tell you what you can do with it. Because again, this is a recipe within a recipe. This is delicious on bread. Absolutely fabulous with some fresh ricotta cheese, and put this on top. This was one of my favorite sandwiches, still is. You could also toss some pasta with this and make a wonderful meal. I love it on pizzas, as you're going to see today, but you could also just enjoy it as a side dish. Rapini has fabulous health benefits, lots of vitamins, lots of minerals, and I'm not going to quote the amount of calcium, but if I had a question to ask, if you were listening to what Tracie was saying in the beginning, you would know how much calcium per cup. I think you told them, right, Tracie?
So it's 118 milligrams of calcium per 100 milligrams of rapini. And
Okay.
actually, we're getting some questions on the rapini. Is now a good time for a question? Okay.
It is a great time for a question.
I think for people who are unfamiliar with rapini. The other name that it goes by is broccoli rabe. So someone was saying, well, where do we find it? Probably in a larger grocery store. It's seasonal. So now I guess is the time, Emily, sorry, I'm asking you questions you may put your farmer hat on. Is now the season for rapini?
It is. Locally, if you know a farmer, this is a great time to get really young rapini. It tastes wonderful and it's absolutely fresh and delicious. You will always find it in the grocery store. Typically, it's a little bit of a softer flavor in season, so kind of spring and early summer. As it sits around in your garden or from a farmer's market, it tends to get a little bit stronger in flavor, but doing a little trick of blanching it is the way to go because you will remove some of that bitterness. And it is something that if you buy kale, it's typically kind of in the same bunch or in the same area in the grocery store where there's kale, collards, there's also dandelion greens. Some smaller grocery stores that have a lot more culturally diverse greens definitely will have rapini. And if it's not there, find your produce manager and ask, because it is something that it's not too expensive and it's very, very versatile in all different cultures of food. So it's one of my favorite ingredients because I grew up with it, but when I introduce it to people and they haven't experienced it, you can see that there's lots of versatility with it. I know, Tracie, you and I both have an affinity for rapini frittata. So
I was just going to bring that up because we have a recipe that we did on the website. That's another great recipe because, again, the ingredients were very thoughtful when we create these recipes because we want to feature the bone building nutrients. And so if you are interested, all you have to do is get on the recipes section of the Osteoporosis Canada website and you can find that rapini frittata recipe. But for some people, they're also asking, can you substitute Swiss chard or spinach or kale for the rapini? And so I'm going to let you answer, Emily, but before I do that, what I will say about substitutions are, these are ingredients that we know has calcium. So kale also does, it would be maybe a different amount, and you can check, we have the calcium calculator on the website. So if you're trying to get those nutrients, you need to just do a little bit of work. Spinach is great, has lots of nutrients, but it is actually not a source of calcium because it doesn't absorb. So those are just some things, but I mean, it's got other health benefits. So if you're looking to get, find something else to substitute with, then just keep that in the back of your mind when you're making the substitutions. But Emily, how would it actually work in the recipe?
So basically, when you're purchasing the rapini as a bunch, it weighs around a pound. So you're looking at 12 ounces to about 1 pound. Now, I've given you a little bit of guidance here in the recipe because once you blanch it and chop it, I need you to have about 3 cups. So that's your guideline. If you want to use Swiss chard or any other type of green, you can do the blanching process with all of them. What changes is the length of time. So obviously, I'll use Swiss chard as an example. The stems are a little bit more firm than the leaves. So you can reduce the blanching time to about 2 to 3 minutes. And all you have to do is give the stem a little squeeze. I can actually show you with the one that I blanched here. I'll take one of the rapini stems here and just give it a little squeeze in your hand. Okay, if it's tender, you're good to go. So that's what you're looking for in any of those green vegetables. And so it may take 2 minutes, it may take 5. In our case with the rapini, takes closer to 5, just depends on the thickness of the stems itself. You can always do it for less, and then you'll get a crisper product in the end. And then you just chop it, and you'll need 3 cups. So we all know that spinach, when you cook it, you can have this much spinach and you're going to end up with this much. So obviously you're going to need a lot more spinach than a pound to get 3 cups. Do you want to make the commitment of counting the spinach? You'll probably need at least a couple pounds of spinach and spread it around. You could also use a couple packages of frozen chopped spinach, let them thaw, and then saute them in the garlic and then spread it across. So that's another option for you. Kale would work here as well. And I would do the exact same thing. Give it a little blanch. And then kale, because you're just using the leaves, you really only need a couple minutes to blanch it. And it's all about the greens, baby. It's all about making this pizza bianca full of greens. So in our case, the rapini is going to be doing that. And then don't forget to flavor it. That garlic, that little bit of hot pepper flakes really adds to the overall pizza dish. I've made this pizza numerous times and even my kids eat it. So that's always a telltale sign when I have, okay, let's be honest here, 2 out of the 3 kids eat it. So that's a pretty good percentage, don't you think? Are there any more rapini questions, Tracie?
No, I think you know what, you covered them off. That's great. We're all looking forward to the next step. Where are we at now, Emily? What are we making?
We are making the dough. We're getting to the pizza dough. That's the part, the base of our pizza bianca. And the pizza dough is using the creaminess and again, the texture of that Oikos Greek yogurt. So I'm starting off with 2 cups of all-purpose flour. And if you've seen kind of the yogurt pizza dough recipes, a lot of the times you'll see self-raising flour, which you can buy self-raising. In Canada, you can find a lot of self-raising pastry flour, but not necessarily all-purpose flour. In the States, it's a little bit more readily available. So you could substitute that. But we're going full tilt here. We do want to have a nice light fluffy dough. So to our 2 cups of all-purpose flour, I'm adding 2 teaspoons of baking powder and a teaspoon of baking soda. Does that seem odd to you? It might. We want a nice light texture, but remember how I told you earlier that the yogurt has that nice little bit of acidity to it. And when we use acidic ingredients, we want to balance it off with some help with chemical leaveners like baking soda. Buttermilk would be a good example as well when you see it in a recipe. I'm also adding a little bit of salt. And we want flavor in here too. So we are adding some garlic powder because I want everything to be nice and smooth. We got the fresh garlic here. We're using some garlic powder and some Italian seasoning. We're going full on Italian with this pizza today. And I love using Italian seasoning because it's a great combination of different herbs. So there's thyme, basil, oregano, marjoram. You can actually make your own, or if you don't have any Italian seasoning, just feel free to use dried oregano or dried basil or mix the 2 and you'll still get that really nice herbaceousness in the pizza dough itself. Now, if you took a look at the ingredient list, you'll see that I said 2 1/4 cups of all-purpose flour, but I only have 2 cups in here. Here's my other 1/4 cup. We are going to be using this as we knead the dough. We do have to knead the dough a little bit, not too much. We really just want to gather it together. But here's where our yogurt comes in, okay? So it's 2 cups of our plain 2% Oikos Greek yogurt going in, okay? See how nice and creamy it is? Now, I should mention, I get this question often, maybe not today, maybe no one's asked it, but when I open up, this is the question. Emily, when I open up my yogurt container, there's liquid on top. What should I do with it? Well, you should stir it right in and use it in the yogurt. It's usually not very much, and it's just the settling after packaging. Just give it a good stir, and then you can use it as you would, measure it out. There's my 2 cups. I did measure that, by the way. It was 2 cups. I wasn't doing this willy-nilly and just adding it in. Unless I grabbed the wrong container, then we'll find out if I need to add more flour. So what I'm doing is just stirring everything up here. And the fluffiness really comes from the fact that we're using the combination of yogurt and those leaveners like baking powder and baking soda. You'll start to see the dough kind of become a little bit ragged looking. Okay, so you can see it's coming together nicely. I should also let you know that my pizza is going into a 400-degree oven. So I do have that oven preheating, and I have my baking sheet lined with parchment paper. So that's usually something, if you can, try to get that done ahead of time so that you're not kind of fumbling with, floury hands to do all of that. So I've already got that done. So once you have most of the flour mixed in, just like that, I'm going to work right on my board here. I did save a little bit of what's referred to as bench flour. So this is extra flour that I'm going to sprinkle on the board so that when I dump out the dough, it won't stick too much. So there's my, make sure you scrape it all and get that good stuff off your wooden spoon as well. Okay. So it will feel a little bit sticky right now. Obviously, it's not smooth. I'm going to take some of that 1/4 cup of flour and sprinkle it on top. Okay, and then we're just going to knead the dough. So I'm kind of bringing it together first, sprinkling it with a little bit more flour, and then I'm just going to knead it gently. I'm going to turn it a 1/4 turn, and I can feel that it's sticky. So I'm just going to keep adding some of that flour that I've set aside. Okay, so I just turn it a 1/4 turn, and I'm not pushing really hard here. We're not trying to build up any kind of gluten in here. We really just want to bring it together so we have a nice smooth dough. Okay, now this is our 3rd component of the recipe itself, but it's also another great recipe on its own. So this recipe would be great if you wanted to make a focaccia with it, or just have some quick little buns, or even just a different type of flatbread to use. So you could break this up and to make 2 smaller pizzas. Maybe you want to have a pizza for yourself and then a pizza for the kids, whatever works best. Or if you want to drop one off, do a lovely little porch drop off with pizza, you could definitely do that as well. So as you see, I'm just kind of kneading away. And as I'm doing that, this is becoming less sticky. Okay, it's not sticking to the board, but I am just kind of using the rest of that 1/4 cup of flour. Okay, like so. So when I show you this dough, it should have a nice kind of smooth finish to it, and push it, it pops up a little. And most importantly, it's not sticky. Okay, any questions on the dough, Tracie, before I roll it out?
I do actually. There are lots of questions on the dough. So that looks great. And I think what the great thing about this recipe is we get a lot of people who say, you know what, oh my gosh, I'm tired of cooking, or I didn't think far enough ahead. So if anyone's ever made their own pizza dough, and I mean, I've done it, Emily, obviously you've done it, you have to plan in advance because you use yeast and it has to rise. So, I mean, this is a fabulous kitchen hack. I mean, to use Greek yogurt in pizza dough, I mean, you're not going to let this rise, right? We're gonna just keep going, and we're gonna make it. And I mean,
exactly.
We're just gonna keep going. So in terms of like why you don't have to use yeast, can you just talk about that a little bit?
For sure. So yeast would be in a pizza dough where there is yeast, that's your element of rising. So if you were to feel this dough right now, and I really wish there was an element where I could pass this around so everyone could feel it, it is nice, light, and fluffy. So it actually is, it simulates that yeast type texture. But because we use the chemical leaveners, baking powder and baking soda, that happens instantaneously. So if you think of when you bake a muffin, you have baking powder in it. And then when you put it in the oven, that heat helps puff it up. So the same thing is going to happen to this pizza dough. It's going to be nice, light, and airy. And the combination with the yogurt really helps create that because of the creaminess. That's why we want that 2% yogurt here. And so once it comes out of the oven, you'll actually think that it's like a souffle. It's puffed up, it's beautiful. And then it takes some time to settle down. So then you think of pizza coming out of the oven. It's kind of, you know, you have to let the bubbles of the cheese, because no one wants that roof of their mouth burnt off. And the same idea with this dough as well, because it just needs to settle. And then you end up with this beautiful dough. Now, I will tell you, if you're looking for that really thin crust, you know, wood burning oven pizza, that's not what this is replacing by any means. This is a little bit more of that traditional structured doughy style pizza that a lot of people really love and fit kind of that flatbread category as well. That's why this dough has such versatility. So even if you wanted to break this up and to make little mini pizzettes, like so little mini pizzas, and you could serve them up as an appetizer, that would be fabulous. And you know, along the same lines, you're still getting all that great flavor and the texture. The only thing you'll get is a little bit more crust, which I'm a crust fan. So that's why this pizza has a great crust at the edge. And you'll see as I start to roll it out. So I do need a little bit of help here. I'm kind of just pushing it down with my hands. I do have my bench flour handy still too, because as we roll it out, I definitely don't want this sticking to the board. I want to make sure that it's nice and loose. and I'm going to roll it with a rolling pin. So when I roll it, I'm rolling it I'm just going to the edge and lifting up. I'm not pushing down on my rolling pin. Okay, so if I show you this way, I'm rolling across and lifting up. What that does is help give me a nice even base of my pizza dough. If I continue to roll down, that's when you end up with those really, really thin edges. And that's not what we want. We want this to be nice and even. Were there any other questions about the dough, Tracie?
Yes, actually. So that's great. So I think, again, we're going to talk about substitutions, lots of questions on substitutions. When recipes are created, the ingredients that are used provide structure, texture, flavor. And so by using the Oikos Greek yogurt, the 2%, you're also providing some fat, which I know, Emily, is important in this. So some questions are, well, what will happen if I use, the 0% fat Greek yogurt, or could I use like a stirred yogurt? And I think that those are, you're not going to have the exact, the desired effect from that. And also, again, the question on substituting flour, it's just not going to have that structure because you need the gluten. So could you talk a little bit about, if they wanted to try a different percentage of fat yogurt?
Definitely. So I did in my testing of this recipe multiple times. I did a couple times use the 0% Greek yogurt, plain Greek yogurt, and it works. It separates a little bit out in the bechamel because, again, that little bit of extra fat is replaced with water, and so that's what makes it separate a little bit. Just whisk it back up and put it in. Where I noticed the most was the actual texture of the dough, because it was a little bit of a softer, more textured dough with the 2% as opposed to the 0%. So the preference is the 2% because it does help build the structure and the texture of the dough itself. If you only ever buy 0% and that's all you have in the fridge, the 0% Oikos Greek yogurt, the plain Greek yogurt, will work, and it will, well, you'll never know the difference because you didn't taste the 2%. But I did a side by side, and that's really where the 2% shined. My English is going, Tracie.
That was good. No, Sean, it was good. But that's great.
And I was just going to mention about the flour too. And so gluten-free flour is, it is that, I did not try it with gluten-free flour. Typically, when I feel confident, I will say, I've tried it with gluten-free flour. This one I haven't. And because it is similar to a quick bread, it may work, but I can't guarantee that because gluten-free flours are all structured differently. Typically, those with xanthan gum work a little bit better, but they don't always work one-to-one. So some of them are structured differently in the sense that they use pea protein, like pea flour, or they'll use tapioca flour, and that's really where things kind of change. But I promise to you and to Tracie, I'll try it with, I typically use a one-to-one gluten-free flour that has xanthan gum in it because that's a great substitute. And then we'll let you know. And typically, if the recipe has been tested with a gluten-free product, you'll notice it as a tip or a variation in the recipe. So that's where you can kind of look to and go, okay, they did try it, and then this is the variation. So that's something to look out in the recipes for tips and variations, because that's where you'll see a lot of different options and variations, including things like gluten-free options. So hopefully that helps with that question.
That is great. And then one other quick one now, and then we'll let you get that topped and in the oven, is could you make the dough and then freeze it? We're a big fan of putting everything in the freezer. That way we don't all have to cook every day. So, and I love my freezer. I put everything in there, but would this freeze well and defrost well?
Okay, so normally I would say freeze it up, baby. I don't want you to freeze the dough. I want you to freeze the pizza after it's baked. Okay, so what happens in particular, there is fat in the yogurt, there's 2% fat, but it's not high enough fat to help protect all the other ingredients. So if you were to take this dough, put it in the freezer, when you take it out, it'll be very mushy and squishy, and you'll have to knead more flour into it, which then creates a different type of dough. It's a lot heavier and more dense. So I promise you can freeze it. I just want you to freeze it after it's baked. And it's so much more worth it. It's done. All you have to do is pull it out, thaw it, throw it in the oven again, warm it up, pop it in the microwave, and it's done. So that's where we'll freeze it. Okay.
Sounds
Any
good.
other questions, Tracie?
Not for right now. We're going to let you get that top. That looks good.
Okay. So I'm just going to measure it. I have the kitchen ruler. I don't always measure. I usually eyeball, but it's 11 by 16, and I'm pretty darn close. The other way you can check it is by taking your large baking sheet and kind of holding it over. Does it look like it's going to fit? It's going to fit in there? I think so. So all I'm going to do is, once you've rolled it out, you can literally just kind of pick it up, whoops, or not. It's warm in here, just FYI. I don't want you to worry though, because you can just put it back together. Do I look worried? Don't be worried if this happens, okay? I always tell people, and this is I miss in-person cooking classes, but it doesn't mean I can't tell the same stories. So oftentimes when I teach in person, and we will get back to that one day, I would tell people, if you want to learn how not to do something, come to my cooking class, because I'll show you. And I just did it for you right now. So don't have a lot of lights on in your kitchen, because it really, really heats up the dough. But as you can see, I'm just pinching everything back together. It's a very easy dough to work with. If you feel more comfortable, you could always roll it on the parchment paper and then just slide it onto the baking sheet. You could do that as well. As you can tell, in my kitchen, I like to make a mess. So there's flour everywhere. So I'm just kind of patting it out to make sure that you get to all the edges, and those little parts that broke apart are getting pinched together, and you will never see them, because guess what? This is the bottom, okay? I'm just gonna rub some of the flour off my hands here so that I can put our two toppings on. So this is, you know, kind of the best part, because we've made the dough. The dough comes together quick and easy. Remember, you won't be answering questions when you make the dough. So you'll make the dough, roll it out, put it on, and all be good. But you'll have your other two components ready. Your sauce has been sitting nicely, and your garlic rapini is ready to go. So I'm going to take my bechamel, give it another little whisk, but I want you to check out the texture now. See how nice and thick it got? Okay, just from sitting for that little bit of time, which is perfect because it's going to give us a lovely creaminess to our topping. And then I'm just going to put this right on top. This will be the creamiest pizza that you've ever had, I promise, and flavorful too. So this is something my grandmother taught me. There's no crust on pizza. You go right to the edge. So with this bechamel, you're going to go right to the edge. You're going to coat every little inch, every little square of that pizza. Okay. And you have a nice thick base for the rapini that goes on, just like that. And then we move to our rapini. Okay. So just take your rapini. It's cooled enough that you should be able to handle it with your hands, and then just kind of spread it all around. Try to break up if there's a lot of leaves that have kind of stuck together, break them apart here. But again, try to get to every nook and cranny of that pizza. If you want to kind of sink them in a little bit, you can definitely do that. This is the rustic component of the pizza. I think having greens scattered all over pizza are absolutely wonderful. Now, if you're intimidated by the size, don't be, because I promise you, once you take a bite, you'll go back for more. You cut it into 12, so it's 6 generous servings, but it's fabulous because remember I told you you could freeze it after it's baked, right? Okay, so last part, some shredded mozzarella cheese. And that's going to give us that nice little bit of golden brown on top. You could add a little bit more fresh Parmesan too, if you want it on here. Okay, again, just trying to make sure I get it covered everywhere, just like so. And then it goes into the oven. So believe it or not, after this amount of work at 400 degrees, It only takes 20 minutes. Don't worry though, I won't make you wait 20 minutes. I'm just gonna wash my hands and tidy up my area because I've baked one for you so I could show you what it looks like. And I'm gonna cut it. And I'm sure Tracie will want me to taste it just to make sure that it's okay, right, Tracie?
Emily, you have to make the sacrifice. We all can't smell it, we can't taste it, and we're not going to get any of it. But I just, so a couple more questions, but also,
Yeah, for sure.
Yes, we're all chatting and we're trying to get to everyone's questions, but it is really fast. And I mean, the fact that you don't have to let the dough rise. We've had a couple of questions where people said, can I use a bread maker to make the dough? But it's literally, you stir it together, you knead it a bit and you do it. So you don't really need to use a bread maker. And Emily, I'm not even sure if that would even work.
No, you don't need to. So think of it in the lines of a quick bread. So Irish soda bread or biscuits, those types of things where the chemical leaveners are really doing the work for you. That's where the rise is going to happen. And that's what's helping build the texture. So it's not, when you're using yeast, you definitely have to let, even quick rise yeast, you have to let it sit and rise and kind of build. It's building structure and flavor. But that's the benefit of using the yogurt because it's also building the flavor because of the acidity behind it, as well as the texture because we're using that 2% yogurt, Greek yogurt. So it kind of is twofold there, which is really nice. And then we get the added benefit of having the bechamel with the yogurt because it also adds extra creaminess to it. So I know you want to see what it looks like when it's done. Now this has been the pan is still warm. It's been out of the oven. I just took it out before we got started, so about an hour ago. And this is what it looks like, okay? And I'm gonna slide it off because it slides off nice and easily with that parchment paper.
That looks delicious, Emily.
And so if you've ever had, thanks Tracie, I wish I could share it because it is generous portions, but if you've had lasagna, traditional lasagna with bechamel sauce, what ends up happening is it gets this nice, I'm going to show you this edge here because it gets that nice golden crispy bits. And that's what this pizza Bianca also does, which is kind of the best part. No, the best part is actually enjoying it. So you can cut it into nice big squares. And I actually like the center. I love the edges, but the center is also quite tasty. So just cut it across here. If I had my grandmother's old big scissors, I would use the scissors to cut the pizza. That's because my grandmother made pizza in sheet pans like this. This is how we always had pizza. So to me, this is it's very heartwarming to make a pizza like this in this shape. All right. And you do get a little extra crust, but if you want extra creaminess, you're going to go for this piece right in the center. And if you do want that little bit of extra heat, I do have my hot pepper flakes here. You can just add that at the end, or if you have a hot sauce, your favorite hot sauce that you like, you can use that as well. Okay, I'll take this piece because it looks like it's got more rapini. I'll tilt this up here so I don't know if you can see how the dough comes out. Okay, and all the yumminess on top. But that golden brown color of the edge, that's that little bit of bechamel that's burnished. And that's really what the brown color is. But what's that saying? The proof is in the pudding. In this case, the proof is in the bechamel. I'll take a bite. Tracie's going to talk.
I'm going to talk. That looks so good. So again, a couple more strategies. So we have all different kinds of people in our community. We have people who live in larger households. We have people who live with, just on their own or just with one other person. And sometimes, people look at our recipes and say, well, that's just like too much for one person. But again, if you don't want to cook every day, and if you don't have to, why would you? This is a great recipe where, and you freezer safety, so you would let it cool completely, cut it exactly as Emily did, wrap them individually, and then you now have food tucked away in your freezer for a couple weeks, probably even longer. And that way you have things on hand. So it's like you commit to the one day or like the 1 hour of cooking, and then you have things that you can kind of go to have in your freezer. But Emily, I do remember, don't worry, I know you took a bite. I'm going to keep talking while you do that, is that I do remember when we were doing the recipe. So sometimes things don't have equally. So you do need to make it in this size. So you can actually make it in a smaller, and I think it has to do with the yogurt, the bechamel. It'll actually kind of maybe go over the edge. So Emily, can you talk a little bit about that?
For sure. If my family was here, they'd be able to tell you, she made that pizza so many times. Everybody ate it every time, neighbors, friends. And it was really playing around with the bechamel and the amount. I wanted you to be able to make enough that it would be worth making. And so when it comes to the milk amounts and then having the added bonus of the yogurt in there, it wasn't cutting it at a lower amount. So I ended up sticking with the larger size, but all because of what Tracie said as well, because once you cut this and tuck it away, I would recommend freezing it flat, especially if you're loading up your freezer with things. And what that means is I would cut it up in these types of pieces, wrap it. If you have parchment paper, you do a layer in parchment paper, plastic wrap, and then some foil. Because what you can do then is take it out of the foil, take it out of the plastic wrap, put the foil back on and tuck it in the oven. Leave the parchment paper on, you can do that too. And that will help crisp up the edge a little bit again, which is really nice. Or just pop it in the microwave. So the thickness of the bechamel tends to withstand freezing for a few weeks. So you can let it thaw in the fridge and then just pull it out. You can even eat it cold. And I've actually had this. I don't know if I told you what I did with this, Tracie, but it's really good for breakfast. Okay. So, and I'll show you what I did. I won't actually do it, but I'll just kind of go through the motions. I grabbed a skillet, put a little bit of oil in it. I took a piece of pizza, put it in the pan, started to fry it, and then I put an egg on top and covered it with a lid. It was a fabulous breakfast. So if you're thinking maybe you don't want pizza for lunch or dinner, pizza for breakfast, and you're getting the added benefit of a little extra protein, which you already saw how much protein is in this pizza. It's fabulous. So add an egg to it and you get even more. And it's a great vegetarian option.
Who's hungry and who's making this recipe? That just sounded fantastic. I'm all about pizza for breakfast or at any meal. So this is great. So this is, I mean, and again, everyone, like this is 3 separate recipes that you can use because we have other questions that are coming in. Well, what if I wanted to use the pizza dough for another recipe? Absolutely. You can top it with whatever you want. If you make just the rapini and you wanted to use that, like Emily said, there's a lot of, I mean, it's a side dish. You can use it for anything or make it a main. And then you've got the bechamel. So you've got that as well that you can use. So, but all together, it looks like a delicious pizza. And again, so the serving, Emily, correct me if I'm wrong, 2 slices is a serving. And it is 500 milligrams of calcium and 26 grams of protein. There, I remembered. It's all good. I'll be better once I have lunch like Emily. So that's great.
And the one thing you should always remember when you're having Garlic Rapini Pizza Bianca is check your teeth after, because there's bound to be rapini somewhere.
Yes, exactly. There you go. So listen, Emily, thank you so much. Do you have any last minute tips or hints you want to give on this?
I don't think so. Are there any last minute questions, or did we cover as much as we could?
I'm just looking. No, I think we talked a lot about the flour and the types of the fat in the yogurt. And we do have one question. And yes, I'm gonna answer that question. We are recording this, so you will be able to watch it on the OC Replay page. And so Emily, if you're good, thank you so much. I'm just gonna quickly share my screen here. There we go. So for tools and resources. So we've got lots of great tools and resources on the Osteoporosis Canada website. And to help you manage your bone health, you can visit osteoporosis.ca. We have a calculate your calcium tool. So you can get online and you'll find some common foods. You can select your foods and figure out how much calcium you're getting every day. We also have a podcast, Unbreakable, the OC podcast, and you can listen to that directly off the website, or you can stream it on your favorite podcast provider. You can also check out the Know Your Risk quiz. Take the quiz, find out your risk for osteoporosis and associated fractures. And again, we are recording this, and we record all our webinars on the OC Replay webpage. You can watch all our past webinars. So just visit osteoporosis.ca. And again, thank you to our partners, Danone Canada and Oikos Greek Yogurt, for helping us put this webinar on for everyone. And of course, to Emily for doing a great job as always. Stay connected. You can sign up to the national e-newsletter, which will notify you of information and other webinars. It'll directly go into your inbox. You can subscribe on the homepage of the website, and you can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thank you everyone for watching.